what we're saying here. Okay, so you're talking about having done an empathy circle with your students, I guess
Mhm.
some students, and just kind of your experience with it. Yeah, you want to
Yeah,
continue?
and the main takeaway was that they found that this was a good training ground, and not that they're going to engage in this kind of experience in all of their interactions all day, every day, but it primed them to be thinking more toward active listening. And so I think that that's a really positive takeaway from it.
Oh, great. What and how many students were there?
There were three of them
Mm-hmm.
so there were four of us total that
Okay.
engaged in it.
Yeah, ideally, like the first round or maybe first two rounds, there's a little anxiety, like, oh, am I doing it right? And we try to go at least three rounds. One has three turns to
Mhm.
speak. Because into the third round, people have sort of settled into it and they feel the sense of connection.
Yeah, and we
So,
went two rounds, so
yeah. The
that's
third
why we
one
didn't
was
fight.
sort of the third one would everybody they would have gotten it better.
That's when the
So.
magic happens. And
Uh-huh.
I do think that they saw the benefit of it by the end of the second round, and they started to give in a little bit to the "I feel heard"
Mm-hmm.
phraseology that felt a little uncomfortable to them at first. And when we were done, they all said, "Yeah, that was cool. I generally am thinking about what I'm going to say." And one of them specifically, she said she has ADHD, and the way that she tries to connect with people is by jumping in. Um, oh, I that reminds me of, or oh, I've experienced that before too, and so this helped her to quiet that part of her mind and just focus on being present with the person. So I think that was a really positive thing for her.
Great. Yeah, harvesting all those insights and documenting them. And we have a lot. Yeah, great. Are you
Yeah,
going to
that's pretty
continue
cool.
that or do some more? Or
I haven't set up like formal ways of doing it. I would like to. I'd like to continue it and maybe have it be maybe even like a standing weekly thing where people can sign up and come to it. But I'll need to talk to my department and see if there's space for it, if it makes sense to have it like be something that they advertise throughout the department. Maybe because I think it's really valuable.
yeah, I think for students it'd be good just to be able to talk about what they're dealing with. I've done. There was a class that was for Stanford for high school students who were taking Stanford classes, like online, and they would get together online, and we did empathy circles with them, and it was just like, what's going on for you in your life, and a lot of them were talking, they were talking about personal things like with the troubles with the stress, the stress that they're dealing with, the struggles they're having with their parents and things like that. So I think it can help just relieve stress and anxiety in life just when you get heard and seen by someone else. Just you get to, voice that. They did have an in-person conference, and I took our empathy tent there. It was at Stanford, set up the empathy tent, and the students, came in. We held some empathy circles, and there was the students who had been around for a long time and were friends. It was really into like put downs and kind of one-upmanship, and they were kind of making fun of the whole empathy circle process, and just kind of sort of playing with it. But then we did a circle with students who were new, right, who weren't part of the culture yet of that group, and they were very open and
Hmm.
personable, and so it's just very, very different. So anyway, I just see it. Yeah, I just see a lot of potential with students.
Yeah, gosh, I mean, if I had, maybe I will have 20 years that I can just keep studying this. I don't know exactly what my life will look like after grad school, but um, I would love to continue just studying this qualitatively, just, get people's real lived experiences, and rather than trying to reduce it down to numbers, like
Hmm.
just I love just hearing people's experiences through this. So I've enjoyed reading through let's see, on your website, you have a bunch of
Oh,
testimonials.
right. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I really like that because that's where it gets real for me. where
Yeah.
it's this is what actual real people have experienced with it. So um yeah, with regard to the scientific study of something, I'm much more of a, you might call a phenomenologist. Like I want to
Hmm.
understand the lived experience of the phenomenon itself rather than reducing it down to measures and numbers and statistics,
Yeah.
because that kind of takes the life out of it for me.
Me too. I would say I'm that same approach, and I think Rogers was a phenomenologist too. I
I think
read
so.
somewhere, so it's kind of a line of, yeah, a way of being. So
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a wonderful way of looking at the world, I think. So you said that there was a presentation. I've watched the video of your first presentation where you were talking about the definitions of empathy. Is that
yeah, I
what you're
thought I would
talking
show
about?
that again, but just
Yeah.
go slower and discuss it. So I have it here ready to share, so I
Okay.
can kind of get started with that. Um, Okay, so it's just for our empathy summits. This was our introduction for the empathy summit, and I'm going to keep refining this. So it's defining empathy in the context of the empathy circle. This is an empathy circle that we did at UC Berkeley. We set up on Sproul Plaza. We've set up multiple times, and so that you can see some circles in the background. So we've done it with college students just out on the next to our empathy tent, and there's some videos of that too.
And so
And let's
you have
see.
multiple facilitators that go and then you can set up multiple
Exactly. Yeah. And they have their
representation.
t-shirts too. So you can see that's Lou, who was just he's one of the board members. And in the background, you see other people, couple others with
Hmm.
t-shirts,
That's
there
great.
too. So, yeah, we have facilitators um, and let me just go through what I write here this year. So this year, I'm really wanting to focus on the definitions because with our nonprofit, the Empathy Center, want to really focus on building a movement, like an empathy movement, and and it's really, and I think for that empathy movement, we need, clear definitions, and I want to just kind of be, kind of working on that, maybe write some articles and stuff like that, and a book. And so I'm just kind of getting started with that project. And here it is. Yeah, we're building the empathy movement with the vision to make mutual empathy a primary social and cultural value. And let's see. And then and for that, like I'm saying, we need to have a definition of empathy. I don't know if you saw this video here of,
If you shared it in your presentation, I mean, this looks familiar, but I don't remember what he said.
yeah. So this is, when Barack Obama was going to choose a Supreme Court nominee, he said, "Well, I'm going to have them be, competent and intellectually sound, but also have a sense of empathy." And when that was said, I mean, the conservatives just kind of went crazy about that empathy. Like, what is empathy? And this is Senator Jeff Sessions, who was head of the Judiciary Committee at that time, in the Senate, and he was really upset. And I'll just play up. I'm actually going to stop the share because I have to share it with sound. So. I think
Oh, how do you do that?
There's
That's
a
something I need to learn how to do.
there's a little button. It says when you go into the share, it says share with sound, and it's
Oh,
like
okay.
not just on the side there. Otherwise, you don't. Uh, oh, where'd our screen? Anyway, I don't know where our screen went, but okay, let's just play it here. Hopefully, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay, I don't know why it's not playing.
And anyway, what is
There we
empathy?
go.
What is empathy? Is this your personal feeling that had a tough childhood, or something prejudice that you have? You're Protestant or Catholic, your ethnicity, your race, some biases you brought with you to life and to the court? Is that what an empathy is?
Wow.
So yeah, and this
That
is
is like unintelligible.
Are you able to hear it?
Yeah, no, but I just don't understand what he's getting. I mean, I understand where he's coming from because that is one of the things that we have to consider when we're talking about empathy is we do bring our biases, but the way he said it, just I don't think he quite got to the point.
So I think I mean, he has a point in the sense that the definition is unclear,
It really is.
right? So it would, because of that lack of clarity, it leads to, to this kind of a problem. And I think they should have had a hearing, like, they have all these hearings in Congress. Let's have a hearing on empathy and have a
Yeah.
discussion about it. Because what actually happened is, like, the conservatives were really, against this empathy because they were confusing it, I think, with sympathy. It's like, hey, there's these victims, and the victims are going to get preferential treatment.
Yeah.
And it's not how I'm defining empathy. And I think that when conservatives understand, it means that everyone just gets heard and kind of has a seat at the table, and we try to work out our differences. That usually they're very supportive of it. So
Yeah, that's so funny that it's such a divisive word because and I know we've talked about this ad nauseum, but you and I have a shared understanding of what it is, and it's something very different from what he's talking about. Oh, you muted yourself.
we're
There you are.
not seeing you when I share this. But let me see if I'm all right. So and here we are. So okay, so that's the and actually something else that there was a like whenever whenever a nominee came up for the there's different levels of just the courts. There's the Supreme Court, then there's district courts, and for everyone that's a nominee, they have to fill out like a 4-page questionnaire. Have you now, or have you ever empathized? It's like really crazy.
And
It,
what is that? What do they mean by that?
they actually ask nominees if they believe in this value of empathy.
Yeah, but I guess my question is what version of empathy are they
That's
referring
it.
to?
It's unclear. It's just the
Yeah.
term empathy, and again, we have that they're I think they're confusing it with sympathy, feeling sorry for people, and yeah, and it's leading to this other confusion about
Yeah.
empathy too, right? That's against empathy book, the suicidal empathy book that's coming out, this toxic empathy, how progressives exploit Christian compassion. That one's like really popular. I mean, if you look on, on the Christian community. I mean, it's got something, couple several hundred reviews,
Hmm.
on Amazon, and I've all of them, I've emailed them, said, hey, would you do a recorded interview? And they said, oh, I don't have time for it, so but I keep trying.
At some point we'll get them.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop there. Here's another one. There's
Sin of
another book.
empathy. I haven't heard of that one.
It's coming out, and the Joe Wrigley. If you do a search on Joe Wrigley, you'll he had about 3 or 4 years ago. He wrote a lot of articles, against empathy,
Hmm.
and I tried to, talk to him too. He wouldn't uh, talk to me, so but I will keep trying.
Is it because
And
you're pro empathy and he doesn't
I
want to
think
engage with
so.
that?
Yeah, it's. I think, yeah, because I think so, because I'm pro empathy, sort of an advocate
Hmm.
for a culture of empathy. And the criticisms that they have are actually, I agree with the criticisms, but I see it as actually what they're criticizing is a lack of empathy. So
Hmm.
I'm hopeful that, by dialoguing and creating a clear understanding that can kind of win them over to the critics. And I have talked to Fritz Breithout, who did The Dark Side of Empathy, and there's an interview out there
Yeah.
with him.
And what's his premise?
Um, I can't
Is it
even remember because it's probably about 5 years ago that I interviewed him, but he's, yeah, if on my website I'd have to go through again to remember all of his criticisms. One is, I think, that empathy is just directed toward, if you have, two people in a conflict, you're going to empathize with this, with
one of
your
them?
your side,
Yeah.
right? Versus that you have this holistic empathy, and it's a matter of creating a space where all the sides listen to each other. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
so
like
that
Paul
was
Bloom
one.
says,
Mm,
where it's like a spotlight,
yeah.
where you can only have your spotlight on one person or the other. It's like possible to empathize with both sides of something.
Yeah, and I'll send you after this. There is an interview, and I had, it's all, I think it's all documented. So anyway, that's the current definitions. Problematic. The current definition, it's not easy to understand. They're obviously not clear. The way that the definitions are being articulated. You can just see, there's all these, people who don't understand it and they're against empathy. And I think it's because of the definitional problem. And also it can be rather abstract and, academic, and especially like these terms, affective and cognitive empathy. Uh, and yeah, so I think that, yeah, I'm just thinking about the phenomenology part, that I think that wouldn't even use cognitive and affective empathy. But
Hmm.
anyway, that's another topic.
Well,
I'm
and
just,
the thing that I take away from that is if we have all of these esoteric terms, I mean, it helps us academically understand it, but how is it actually benefiting people? Like, if we're not using our academic understanding to actually make people's lives better, then we're really wasting our time talking
yeah,
about something that should be helping make the world a better place.
exactly. That's what I had there. We need a clear and practical definition.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying that to define empathy in the context of the empathy circle itself is just very functional, very practical. There's just a lot of benefits you get right off the bat. So to take this, definition out of the abstract and make it concrete will also make it practical.
Yeah.
So as we strengthen the empathy circle and the understanding around the empathy circle, we're sort of strengthening sort of the practicality of it, of how to actually use it for you know personal benefit and relational benefit. And you can experience the definition, you can map. And the other thing I
Mhm.
want to do is map out the definition, so having the basic definition of the empathy circle, that we can map the different definitions on it. So that's why I kind of wanted to show this definition, and then when we go through your presentation, how does it map on to the empathy circle? So I always have that as a touchstone.
Yeah. I like that so much.
So the basic, you know, framework, I'm kind of calling it holistic empathy, and it's a definition model. And these are the parts. And this is something, the basic empathy, self-empathy, imaginative empathy, and holistic empathy. So this is kind of the terms I'm using. In terms of basic empathy, I'll talk more about that, but I'm not totally happy with the term, but trying to differentiate the different parts of a holistic empathy,
Hmm.
framework.
So you're saying that these first three are parts of the holistic empathy?
Yeah, uh-huh.
Okay.
And so this is the empathy circle. I'm just assuming everyone knows how the empathy circle works. There's the speaker, the person who's speaking, then there's the active listener. And as the active listener, it's sort of a face-to-face basic empathy. I'm listening to the person. I'm sensing into their experience. Um, and all this is really Carl Rogers. If you look at his work, he really kind of laid out this experience, and that's what he did in his therapeutic. It was just listen to the person,
Mhm.
use active listening as a way of sort of deepening that basic empathy. And we have this basic empathy that's just part of human nature, as I see it. Is it's just uh, that it can be blocked. And that's actually something I want to go into at another point, is those roadblocks. Now I've got a chance to look at those, but going into some of those roadblocks.
Mhm.
So that's the basic empathy. In the empathy circle, when the active listener is listening to the speaker, it's this basic empathy that they're doing. And I'm not to- I've just been calling it that, empathy, but there's other layers of empathy. So I'm not to differentiate. I've been just starting to use the word basic empathy, but I'm not totally happy with that. Anyway, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So in terms of basic empathy, I mean, there are so many different ways that people construe what that would be, but you're talking about active listening.
Even more so, it's active listening helps to strengthen the basic empathy. Uh, it supports it. It's not basic. Active listening is not. I mean, even if I didn't reflect back what the speaker is saying, it's sort of that quality of attention that I'm
Okay.
giving to the speaker, the sense of presence. And in fact, that's what the next slide is here, is sort of describing what that is. So, and again, basic empathy is the listener's effort to hear the other person deeply, accurately, and non-judgmentally. Empathy involves, he's saying it involves skillful, reflective listening, that amp and that's, I think, it's just sort of a crutch basically that helps, clarifies and amplifies the person's own experiencing and meaning without imposing the listener's own material. So uh, that's kind of Rogers kind of describing that experience. And he also goes on and says an empathic way of being with another person has several facets. It means entering the private perceptual world of the other and becoming thoroughly at home in it. It involves being sensitive moment by moment to the changing felt meanings which flow in this other person, to the fear, rage, tenderness, or confusion, or whatever he or she is experiencing. So that's that quality. Uh, and that can be gone into, into much more depth. We're just trying to
Yeah.
kind of give kind of a rough sketch of the framework. I don't know if any thoughts.
Um, I mean, I have a million thoughts, but I want to
Oh,
see where you're going with this to
okay.
see if like the other levels of empathy that you're talking about answer the questions that I have.
Okay. All right. So then the next level, the next aspect or facet of holistic empathy is self-empathy, that the speaker is sensing, as they're speaking, they're sensing into their own experience. They're sensing into their own sense of self. And like when you were, you had listened to me, and then it was your turn to speak. You were sensing into yourself and saying, "Oh, nothing is coming up, right? I
Mm.
have sort of a blank." So you're sort of empathizing. You are empathizing, self-empathy with your own felt experience of being in a state of blankness, and which is, a quality. And that would be the self-empathy.
Can I ask a question about
Yeah,
that?
anytime,
So
just
just
jump in.
mapping onto it with my own experience with
Mhm.
feeling that emptiness, would you say that part of self-empathy is also verbalizing that? Like when I said I feel empty, that is, it seems like that's part of that self-empathy process.
I would say that it actually helps with self-empathy. It's like the self-empathy was you just sensing into it. It was even like pre-verbal, right?
Mhm.
That was a self-empathy, but you can strengthen that self-empathy, can be deepened, strengthened, and by sharing that and getting an empathic reflection, it actually helps you to go deeper in that experience of self-empathy. So being empathized with, being heard by someone else
Yes.
actually strengthens, deepens your sense of self-empathy. And Rogers, mentions that too. He says, by being listened to by someone who understands makes it possible for the person to listen more accurately to themselves with greater empathy towards their own visceral experiencing,
Oh,
their
I love
own
that.
vaguely felt meanings. So he didn't call it self-empathy, but he was saying, well, you become your own therapist at one point, but he was kind of hinting at it and pointing to it, but he didn't use the word
Hmm.
self-empathy there.
Yeah, and I definitely I agree with that so deeply, where there are times when somebody reflects back what you say, and I've been on both sides of that, where I've been the one reflecting to somebody and somebody else has been reflecting to me. And you see that it helps you to understand yourself better.
Yeah,
It helps you to be like, oh yeah, I hadn't put those thoughts into words yet, and so I hadn't really solidified how I felt about something. Yeah, so I think that's a really important part of this. That's great.
and yeah, and Rogers mentions too that people who are in emotional turmoil or their identity is have troubling with issues with their sense of identity, that by being heard by someone, it strengthens your sense of identity because you might be sort of alienated, detached with what's going on, but when you're heard by others, it helps create a sense of self for you. And he's saying that for people to really change, he thinks that they pretty much need others to see them. And he's some of his papers he talks about others, academics who have talked about that sense of self is developed, by being seen by others. And he says for himself, what he finds is helpful is like when you have, for him, if he has a vague idea, and I sense that have that too, like I'm sort of at the edge of my awareness, there's some tentative idea, but by being able to bring that to consciousness and share it with someone, it starts helping that idea to grow and maybe even turn into, a fully formed idea and into action
Mm.
too. And so that would be another part of the, self empathy and how being empathized with. Like a lot of times I hear people say, "Oh, you got to think of yourself first," but it's actually if you're doing that in a detached way, you can get sort of alienated. And I think that, being in an empathy circle where you're heard by other people, not just one other person, but at least, three or four others are hearing you, it actually helps to ground you and connect with you yourself, and to see yourself from different points of view being reflected by others. So I think that's another aspect of the empathy circle that helps your self empathy. One, being heard by someone actively, but then also being heard by multiple people as well.
And one thing that I think is so great about it is it isn't just one person who gets to experience that. It's each person as they share
Yeah.
and are
Uh-huh.
empathized with that they get to experience that self-empathy as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It has mutual, everybody's benefiting from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other level is, I would call it imaginative empathy. And this is not really used commonly, this term. And this is kind of what, if you see cognitive empathy, I see it just defined in different ways, but is, as understanding. But I also hear cognitive empathy being defined as imagining yourself in someone else's situation. And that's like another level that that's in and I think that relates into the self other distinction. As a child is like 2 years old or whatever, they can start imagining themselves in others people's situation, and it's a different phenomenon than just the direct empathy. And this is where we can actually step into someone else's shoes and imagine ourselves in their situation. And this is different than it's based on the basic empathy, but it's a next level, and it's also developmentally a next level. And I
Hmm.
like the word imaginative empathy much more than cognitive empathy because it taps into the imaginative, creative quality. Um, yeah. So, and I'll kind of go.
And so if I understand that correctly, it would be you are feeling yourself like what I would do and say if I were in that situation. So you're still maintaining your sense of self, but imagining what it would be like to be that person. Is that right?
Yeah, and there's two different forms of that. There's and I can't remember the terms. There's one, what would I be like if I was in your situation? And the other is like, what would I be experiencing if I was you in your situation?
Hmm.
So those are two different
Yeah,
sort
that's
of
very different.
imaginative roles, but they're still imaginative. You're still sort of imagining.
Yeah, and I don't know if I mentioned this last week because I've been thinking about it a lot the last week, but I think that you have to start with that kind of self-focused version of it before you can make the jump to that deeper level of imagining what it would be like to be you in your situation.
Hmm.
Like as I teach my kids about it, they can't they can't wrap their brains around what would it be like to be you in your situation because I don't know what it's like to be you in your situation. And so we start with how would you feel in that
Hmm.
situation. And so it seems like that's even within imaginative empathy there are developmental
Right. Uh-huh.
milestones within that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because I have a 5-year-old who she really struggles with empathy. Her twin sister is overly empathic sometimes. She takes on like viscerally other people's emotions and things like that. But then the unempathic twin it's just very opaque for her. And so
Mm-hmm.
rather than talking about how do you think she feels, for her, I have to start with how would you feel? And that like helps her to connect with her lived experience. And so I think that that's going to be something I want to dive into deeper as well,
Yeah.
is understanding those developmental stages.
Yeah, that's a real interesting kind of aspect. Well, there's another aspect of imaginative empathy is that we can feel into any role and perspective. And, Meryl Streep talks about this, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
is I thought a lot about the power of empathy in my work. It's the current that connects me and my actual pulse. So a fictional character in a made-up story allows me to feel pretend feelings, sorrows, and imagine pain. So she steps into the role of, Margaret Thatcher or, Julia Child, like, in a big way, right? I mean, she
Yeah.
just totally embodies that and imagines herself being that person and acting. And she, does probably all kinds of studies about the person's quirks and personality that really, take on that personality. So, and that's different than again the basic empathy. And this is kind of like an unlimited. So let's imagine, like, here's imaginative empathy. Like, now let's have an empathy circle, right? With the person taking on all the different roles. So it's two
Wow.
layers of empathy where, the speaker, Julia Child, could be speaking to to Meryl Streep, the actor, as Margaret Thatcher, and be actively listening. And these are all four different characters that she has. So this aspect of imagination is like huge, how you can kind of take on roles. And, we do that in the empathy circle facilitator training. There are four sessions, but we had a fifth session to introduce conflict mediation. Or maybe I'll talk about that later, but I think it's later in the presentation. So anyway, here's one role. So you can just kind of, think about these multiple layers but you can also imagine yourself being an animal, right? You can have an empathy circle like, oh, you're a tiger, you're a cow, or you're a whatever, the
Koala.
koala, yeah. And then you can speak, from those positions,
Hmm.
and you can do it at one layer and then the second layer, you can actually do an active listening. So you're actually doing kind of two levels of empathy.
Hmm.
And again, you can imagine yourself being a fruit. So anything, you kind of imagine yourself being yourself in the future. I think that's like imaginative empathy as well. So it's this
Yeah.
whole aspect of imagination that I see it a lot in the literature, like saying that, oh, in, cognitive empathy, you're imagining yourself in some role. But I think calling it imaginative empathy is kind of sexier. It's like people would be more interested in imaginative empathy than, calling it cognitive empathy.
Yeah. I can see this being like a fun improv game for like a theater class. My daughter's really involved in theater, and I was when I was in junior high and high school. And we would do games similar to this where you're taking on different roles. And so I love the idea of mapping
Hmm.
it over an empathy circle because I think it would expand an actor's ability to feel into each one of those different roles.
Yeah, I love to see that too. So, and
And
we
there
had,
is research that I've read that says that people who are involved in theater are more empathetic,
hmm
which I mean, it makes sense when you see people like Meryl Streep who can become so fully become another person. That's like on steroids. It's empathy on the
hmm
next level.
yeah, that's why I chose her because she's so good at it.
Yeah, she really is.
Yeah, and the other is I was mentioning, yeah, I didn't have the slide here, but in our workshop, the fifth session, we're showing how empathy circle can be used in conflict mediation. So we created an imaginative situation where there's four siblings and the parent just passed away, the last parent passed away, and each of the siblings has a reason for why they feel that they should get the inheritance.
Mm.
And then they argue about it, but they use empathic listening to discuss it. And it kind of introduces how the empathy circle can be used for conflict mediation. It also sort of introduces the imaginative empathy uh, how you can use imaginative empathy. And there's also a process called restorative circles that uses a similar process where if someone has an issue like in their family and the family members won't take part in an empathy circle, you can have an empathy circle with people who are familiar with it and they take on the role of your family members or
Hmm.
whoever you're in conflict with, and you explain to them, this is a father, he's very introverted and domineering. This is a mother, very passive or something. And then you can actually role play. It's amazing how accurate it can sometimes be and how,
Wow, that's so interesting.
transformative it can be.
So this is a different practice. I need to look into it because I'm not familiar with the practice.
We don't do it much, because we've been focusing just on the basics, but this is
Mhm.
something that was sort of like a next level. And we've done a little bit of it, and I have experience, but I haven't focused so much on the imaginative empathy part,
Hmm.
just because there's so much work just doing the first part. But it's a lot of fun. The imagination part is just like all that acting and a lot of
Yeah.
creativity. Okay, so then the holistic empathy. Um, which is the quality of empathy in the relationship. So everyone sensing into, you walk into a room and you can feel the energy of the room, right? If there's a group of people there and you can feel it, is there's like an openness, an invitingness, or you can feel everyone's into their own world and there's like a hostility or something. So it's the holistic empathy is kind of all the different aspects of empathy together, sensing into what is the quality of the relationship, just not listening to each person individually, but sensing into the whole, and it's made up of those different parts, of the basic empathy, of the self empathy. So everyone has self empathy, sensing into themselves. People are all listening to each other, and what is the quality of the group? So that's kind of what
Something
I'm.
that's coming to mind, I'm just going to write this down. This
Yeah.
seems like a meta level of thinking about the interaction. rather than it just being me or just me, like me self-empathizing or me empathizing with you, one person. This is taking it up to a higher level and noticing the feeling that's in the group. So
Yeah.
it's I want to do some research on that. I like that a lot. So
Yeah,
met empathy.
it's a mutual empathy. It's, reciprocal empathy, all these kind of terms for that. And there's not a lot that I've seen, about the mutual empathy. There's a little bit
Yeah.
about that, the holistic. And I'm just, coming up with these terms that I'm not, so far, there's also holistic with an H and a W too. So I'm kind of, I think it's the actually with the W, holistic
Because it's
empathy.
whole.
Yeah.
Um, I want to share my presentation video with you. Maybe you can
Okay.
watch it on
Just
your own time. I'm trying to think if they actually like where they saved it. I'll have to find it. And then
okay.
I
Let me
can
just get
you.
through this real quick. A couple
Yeah, yeah,
slides that
yeah.
we can open it up. So yeah. So um, the holistic empathy. So it's a way of sensing into the. I think there's the empathy is there's a larger. It's a sensing into. So basic empathy. You're sensing into someone else's experience. So more of a fullness, a depth of sensing using your whole sort of body awareness. The self empathy is sensing into our own experience. Imaginative empathy, imagining ourselves into an experience, and then the holistic sensing into the community's experience, sort of a mutual empathy. And yeah, I think the that what I had that for. That's just the holistic again, just another picture of holistic empathy and other definitions. So what I'm looking at is to have this basic framework to ground the definitions you hear into the empathy circle. So, I had mentioned that with the Scientific American article when Elizabeth, who wrote that, that's what I had sort of, had kind of advised her for because when she was going talking to all these academics, bring it back into the empathy circle so you can show what are they talking about in the context of the empathy circle, and then also to ground the criticisms in the empathy circle. So I can kind of role play the criticisms that people are having in the empathy circle and kind of demonstrate, where we might not be understanding the terms the same way. And in the empathy circle, where and how do you see it playing out? So that anyway, that was the project.
That's so great. And so this you're continuing to compile different people's definitions. And I remember you do have a like a almost a spreadsheet, like a table of different definitions and how they map onto different parts of the
Yeah.
empathy cycle. Is that right?
Yeah, so what I'll do is, I'm going to keep building on this presentation and then go over to map out, to take all those different definitions, like those tables. I have a whole website that's just nothing but like definitions that people have and be able to
I'm
map
looking at it right now because I didn't close it down last week after you shared it with me.
me the
It's
link. You just want to see if that's the same one. Or-
let's see.
okay. Yeah, that's one. There's another site.
I'm looking at your Edwin's basic definition. And you have an image with the empathy wheel.
Yeah, I got stuff all over. It's like that was an old model, the wheel of empathy. Um, oh, here it is. 1 second. This is another. That was, way back when I kind of went through, that's a lit review. So I'd kind of gone through, researched a bunch of papers. I was around training, but there's definitions in there somewhere.
Oh, okay. This is the same site that has the blocks
Yeah, that's, thought
definitions.
there was definitions there somewhere. Have to look through. I have to kind of organize all this stuff, which I'm in the process of
This
doing.
is so cool. It's so nice to see somebody who's as nerdy as I am. I do this kind of thing too. I love it so much.
Well, it seems like everybody does that when they're really working on empathy, they create their spreadsheet. Anita did that, I remember she
Yep.
sent me her spreadsheet and I think
Yeah.
you have a spreadsheet too. So I want to be able to take those spreadsheets and then map them onto the empathy circle so I can, you know, kind of ground it in that experience.
Yeah, because it can feel a little ungrounded the way that we talk about it. It's just kind of like, what does this even feel like or look like when you experience it? So, but then mapping it over the empathy circle for people who have experienced it, then they can say, "Oh, that's what you mean by that definition of it." Yeah, so I think that's a really great project.
So that's what I hope we can do kind of in our discussions too. Can always sort of try to be mapping it back because you had a whole list of definitions, that you were referring to and how do those map onto an empathy circle?
Yeah, and I want to go through and see how they even map across the definitions that you have listed. Because that I think that would be helpful to just compare our notes. Yeah.
So what's your thoughts in general about the framework? I do think that is unique in terms of the empathy circle as for the definitions that nobody else is sort of taking that approach. It tends to be, more open, philosophical, and try to bring it into this
The
scope.
practical.
Yeah.
No, I have actually, I'm going to share a personal experience just to show why I think what you're doing is valuable. Because I've always been so focused on actually hands-on, like being in it with people. But as I've been getting into academia, um, I have been losing that. And I'm finding that it's so ironic because I'm studying empathy on an academic level. And I feel like it's making me become less empathetic in
Mm-hmm.
my daily interactions with people because I'm getting so cerebral about it that I'm like, I don't see. I don't know if it's that I don't remember how to start a conversation about normal things with people because I can get into deep conversations about deep topics really quickly with people if they want to go there with me. But for people who are not thinking about these same exact topics on a deep level, like I am and like you are, I sometimes find that we don't have much in common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's silly. And so I think bringing it back to the practical, bringing it out of the ivory tower and bringing it back to like how do you apply this in real life with real interactions with people, that's the whole point in the first place. Otherwise, why study it?
Yeah, so I'm hearing there's a practical aspect to this that you like the practicality aspect of doing things, and as you study empathy, you're getting more into a cerebral academic sort of a space,
Mhm.
and that maybe a bit more detached from that actual experiential practical aspect, and that you're appreciating this because it kind of brings it back to that practicality. And there's a lot of experience. It's affecting how you relate to people, getting so into the abstract.
Yeah, isn't
Uh,
that funny?
yeah.
Because I got into it because I see the value, the intrinsic value of the practical, but in the process, I'm losing the practicality
Hmm.
of it. Um,
Yeah.
I think it would also be beneficial to see how this maps in other frameworks as well. Um, Maybe looking at the nonviolent communication, like they have specific ways that they walk through a conflict resolution setting, and just see what the commonalities are between these different um, approaches that are very hands-on and practical. That might be a different
Hmm.
approach that
Yeah.
could
Two
be.
two things. One is, NVC is based on Rogers'
Mhm.
work,
Oh yeah, so
so
same
there's
grandpa.
so it's pretty much, I think the core is the same. The second is about that. I think the one thing that really attracts me about Rogers is he did the scientific and the experiential. So that quality you're talking about, getting so abstract and away from the experiential, I think he did a pretty good job of merging the two. So he would kind of be doing, in his counseling, doing the experience of, listening to his clients, but then he would talk about the landscape of the experience of it and, have his theories. But it has a different feel. His work, to me at least, doesn't feel like very difficult and abstract. Yeah, I think it can be merged, right?
Yeah,
Having the two can be merged without getting into that feeling of the abstract, detached, purely cerebral. So that's just one response to.
yeah. And the thing about the cerebral stuff is I do think that there is so much value in the philosophies behind it, especially things like what what is a human being? I mean, that's just kind of at the core of philosophy. And you have to wonder, like, if you're not getting deep into philosophy, you wonder why are we even talking about that? But when you bring it back to the practical, if you realize that the way that I am viewing this person as an object that I can either use or who is getting in my way, that means that I am no longer empathizing with them as an equally human being as I am. And so I'm reducing them down to something that is
Hmm.
like subhuman. And I think that that's really important. So taking it up to the cerebral level is important so we can
Yeah.
challenge those underlying philosophical assumptions that we have, but then we have to figure out how to anchor it
Hmm.
back to the earth. And
Yeah.
that's something that I feel like with this paper that I'm working on, where we're going so meta, we're going so philosophical. It I struggle with that because that takes me away from my real ability to connect with people. Because if I'm using words like Dasein that people don't use in their daily lives, then I'm not actually connecting with them and I'm not empathizing with where they are. And so either I have to bring them, like I need to meet them where they are and bring them with me so they can see it, or I need to change the phraseology. Like I need to change the way I talk about it so that I'm still maintaining the same philosophy, but using words that everyday people can understand.
Yeah.
I think that's super important.
Yeah. So it's really it sounds like you're wanting to merge the two and be able to relate to people and not get so abstract um and be able to be practical and connect with people, if I'm understanding it.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's just a really long way of saying I think it's a great project that you're
Hmm. Oh,
taking
okay.
on.
Yeah, because it's doing what it is that you're talking about. That's what I'm trying to do too, because I don't want to get all abstract and just become a intellectual exercise. It's that practicality and the experience too.
Yes.
So in terms of NVC, I think NVC pretty much maps onto the empathy circle. What NVC does. is it's putting a more focus on
On the need.
naming the feelings.
Yeah.
Like when you're a speaker or a listener, that you're able to name your felt experience. Like, oh, I'm excited. I'm bored. I'm sad. So being able to put words to those feelings, and for the listener to be able to hear those and reflect, or even to um, be able to go beyond the edge of what the person is saying felt wise, that you're sensing, making a guess of what they're feeling, to help them, to help them go deeper in
Mhm.
their experiencing. So, and then the concept of, if that there's a feeling that people, the need, that's like, what is the need, that feelings and needs, that you're wanting to say that the feelings are pointing to a need that people have, so if, and the need is met or unmet. So I don't know how much you've looked into NVC, but
Yeah, I've read the book,
mm,
but I have looked into getting trained to become a facilitator because I think it's similar to this in that it's very practical, and I like
mhm.
the practical aspect of it.
Yeah, I think it's just going in a little deep, it's going in deeper into the relationship, and also the
Mm,
philosophy that you're coming from. There's a underlying philosophy that everyone is trying to meet their needs. So when you see someone, you're not judging them, because you're trying to find out what their needs are,
mm,
and then just see about for example, if someone is, very angry, you hear, oh, I hear you're angry, but you're thinking, oh, what's the need underneath the anger? And maybe it's need for being heard, right? So you actually hear them and, oh, I feel heard. And so their need for being heard and seen is met. And that and it's sort of a philosophy underneath. But the approach with the empathy circle, I think, is just a little easier. It's not, there's a lot of philosophy, within NVC, and
yeah,
it takes a lot of training and people. But with the empathy circle, you're learning sort of by doing, and a lot that you learn in NVC, you just kind of learn it by doing, through the experience of it, and hopefully are able to go deeper. So,
yeah. I think that's I would love to get trained in both methodologies to really have a deep understanding because yours is more like the framework wherein you can use NVC principles,
mhm.
it seems.
Yeah, it's the easier starting point. And there's
Yeah.
other practices too. There's focusing, if you're familiar with Gene Genlin's focusing practice.
Let me
Okay, so that's
write that
another
down.
one. If you're wanting, there's a whole constellation of practices, right? That and it's called focusing, Gendlin. You'll come up. So he was also, so both, Rosenberg and Gendlin were students of Carl Rogers. So they kind of built on his work. So Gendlin's insight, he did a study. He said, okay, people are growing in therapy, and some people, you know, grow and some don't. They go to their therapist and they have growth in their dealing with their issues. Why are they having growth and not, who's having positive motion? And he looked at all the different types of therapy, and he found that they were pretty much the same in terms of effectiveness. But the thing that was what the most effective was actually the speaker. That if the speaker was speaking from their felt experience and going towards the edge of what their felt experience is, so you might have some anger that you're not even aware of, and it's sort of just below the surface, that you're kind of going to that surface, the edge of your felt experience, what's there, and kind of giving space for what wants to arise, what wants to arise. So he has a whole process for
Hmm.
it. It's actually, I would say, it's a self-empathy process. If we put it into the context of the empathy circle, it's going to be the speaker speaking in a way that that they're speaking more deeply
Oh,
And they
okay.
also use active listening kind of in their process.
Well, yeah, I definitely need to pick up this book then. Because I'm seeing that he wrote a book just called Focusing.
Yeah, and
And so that
there's
probably
tons.
goes
There's a whole
well.
institute, that of his work, and a lot of people, working in that field of
International
focusing.
Focusing Institute.
Institute. That's it. Yeah, a lot
Huh.
of videos. So he's another thread, of kind of based again on Rogers' work. And I would say these are tools of how you can go more deeply into an empathy circle. The same way with so focusing is going to help you go deeper, as well as NVC will help you go deeper within the context of an empathy circle. I mean,
Yeah, that's really
deeper into
cool.
your experiencing. So I'm trying to tie it back, again to
Yeah.
the
Well, and it's
empathy
interesting because
circle.
it seems like you can have different levels of empathy circles. You can have the skipping across the surface. This is what I did today. And then the person responds back to you with, oh, this is what you did today, right? You can keep it very surface level. And then you can go to deeper levels if you're tapping into these needs and you're, creating that space where there's that holistic empathy that's present there. So I like it. I like the
Yeah.
idea of you start with the surface level so that you can practice that. And then as you learn these other techniques, then you already have the framework that you can use to go deeper.
Yeah, that's exactly how I'm approaching it. It's like people can start from wherever they are. Some people just parrot back, like almost like the parroting. But I don't judge them. Some people are like, oh, they're parroting, it's terrible or something. But it's where people are starting, right? They're kind of like learning to ride a bike, and you can just start wherever, and then you start observing other people in the circle, and you actually learn to go deeper by observing and taking part. As people reflect back to you, you can hopefully move beyond just the strict, word for word sort of parroting. But people just start where they start, and we can create more curriculum too of how to go deeper, and
Oh yeah.
basically just take from focusing. I mean, just take from curriculum from NVC and focusing, and there's a lot of other, family systems, what do they call it? Yeah, family
Internal
system,
family system.
internal family systems. I think that's like an imaginative empathy, I
Mm,
think, aspect to it. You can do the role playing. So
yeah, that's cool. I like that idea.
yeah.
I would love to help with creating training to go deeper in that because that's something that I think is something I'm equally passionate about. So if you want to
Great.
move in
Yeah,
that direction,
definitely.
count me in.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, the first thing is learn take the training, take it 5 times so you're familiar, with being a trainer, and then we want to create the next level after that, and once you've sort of done it, you'll see what the needs
Mhm.
are for the next. But there's going to be conflict mediation. It'll be kind of self-empathy, it'll be all the, going into feelings and needs. So kind of take from all the other practices and just kind of plug it into the empathy circle. And then
Yeah,
there's
because it does.
also the definitional part too of want to hear kind of go through your presentation again. And if we can kind of go slow and sort of map it over to the empathy circle too.
Yeah. Do you want to have that be our plan for next week? Is
Yeah.
just go through my presentation and we
hmm
can just really go through each one of those definitions.
Yep. That'd be great. And then
Yeah,
we'll
I
have
think
that
that's great.
commonality, and we can kind of see what's next. And I'm going to keep, this gives me a bit of practice, presenting this, and I want to keep refining this presentation because in April we have another empathy summit,
Mhm.
and then so I want to present it again. And then in May there's there's an empathy conference at UC Santa Cruz, and so we're going to be. Let me give you you might be
Yeah.
interested in that because you're not too far away. The Empathy Summit. And we're going to be presenting there. We're going to do some empathy circles too with
Oh,
that group.
I
There'll be an online
absolutely
component.
need to come to that.
Yeah. So here's the here's a link to it. You can. It's through the Virtual School of Australia, and they last year they did the conference in Prague, and this year they're doing it working with it UC Santa Cruz.
Hmm.
We're
Let's see.
partnering with them. Yeah, if you follow the links there.
Yeah, I definitely need to go to that. It's a hybrid event, so they'll have some aspects that are online and some that are in person. Is that what I
Yeah.
understand?
hmm
Okay. Well, I keep thinking, I mean, for the last year since I found you, I've been thinking I need to come down to California and experience some of this firsthand. So this might be a good opportunity.
Yeah, be great. Yeah,
Oh, but that's the week before this huge event that we're doing with sports. We're doing a sports camp on campus, and we're focusing on character development within the sporting context. And that's on the May 30th and 31st.
mm-hmm.
I don't know that that's going to be a good time for me to be leaving, but
There's
I'll
also the
keep it in
online
mind.
aspect. You can
Yeah,
take part
that's a good
online.
point. Okay, well, I'm
It,
going to read more on their website and see what's available. And that's UC Santa Cruz.
yeah, last year we presented about the empathy circle online at their conference. They liked it so much they wanted us to partner and do actually a 2-hour empathy circle. So our group is doing a 2-hour empathy circle with them.
Hey, that's beautiful. How exciting. Okay, so this is put on by, it's not put on by UC Santa Cruz.
It's with
Hosted
them.
there.
It's like a joint project. It's a virtual school of Australia. They hold these at different places, around the country, around the world. The last one, like I said, was in Prague, and
Oh,
this
okay.
one, and this one is they're working together with UC, Santa Cruz.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I want to learn everything I can on the topic. So I will see if I can make it to that.
Yeah, I was going to present about the definition again there, so I'm kind of wanting to prepare that.
How long is that presentation?
20 minutes.
Well, I'm sure you could speak for 2 hours on that topic.
I could I could never stop.
I know.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of fun. And, working with someone who's is passionate about the topic and kind of really into it and has time and space for it. A lot of people like Anita, she's pretty busy with all her work and stuff. And
Yeah.
as a grad student, you're kind of in that learning mode, and
Yeah. And so this
it's
is
kind
the
of
time
fun.
to be going deep into
Yeah.
this
Mm.
rather than just being so. I mean, I have probably 20 projects that I should be working on, but this is the one that I want to work on. And so this
Empathy projects or other.
just most of them are empathy related, but then some of them are like the character development in general. And yeah, I'm really excited about some of these projects that we have in the pipeline. One of them is like a meditation intervention. We're working with Harvard on this, the Harvard Neuroscience lab, and looking at different markers before and after the intervention. And one of them, so two of the markers are empathy and compassion.
Mhm.
And so there are different measures, but there's so much overlap that sometimes you can't tell which thing you're even studying. Um, but then there's also some interesting things like connectedness with nature, engagement with beauty. Um, let's see, what's another one? Dogmatism. That was an interesting one, like willingness to be open to other beliefs or views, which I think is going to be reverse correlated with empathy. I don't think that they're necessarily like directly reverse correlated, but I do think that there's going to be some interesting things to look into there. Yeah, and it'll just be interesting to see how mindfulness meditation influences the whole process, and
Mhm.
if people become more like self-empathetic and also empathetic toward others through this process of engaging with meditation. And
Yep.
there are two different versions of the meditation that we're looking at. One of them is self-mercy, and then also taking it from a hesychastic Christian tradition, looking at the hesychastic prayer, which is asking Jesus to have mercy on you. So one of them is I have mercy on myself, and then comparing that with asking someone else to have mercy on you. So just comparing what's going to be the difference in the outcomes based on something that's introspective versus asking somebody else for help. So that's going to be interesting. So we'll be able to get some papers out of that by the end of this year. And then I told you about my experiment where I'm going to have people engage in political discussions. I also want to create a new measure, just to not to further complicate this whole convoluted science of empathy, because there are hundreds of different measures. I mean, so many different definitions and then so many different measures. But I do think that the measures that we have are not getting at this ability that I've talked about with you, the ability to maintain your sense of conviction to what you believe and be fully empathetic with another person. So none of the measures really look at that ability, and I think that that's something that is missing from the empathy literature. So working on that.
How would you measure that?
So
you?
it would be self-report,
Okay.
like so asking them, and there's always going to be inherent issues with self-report measures, and so that's why I'm doing the actual experiment where I'm going to prime people for those different approaches. So just be empathetic, just stick to your values or your convictions, and then a third one where they're trying to manage both at the same time. And so I might find that people just can't do it, like that it is one or the other. But I do believe that in the course of something like an empathy circle, where you are engaging with the other person and you're empathizing with yourself and you're observing other people empathizing with each other, I think that it is possible to maintain your truth as well as honor the truth of somebody else. So those are just some of the projects that I'm working on. And then I've got all the sports stuff that we're working on too. So
wow, that's a lot. That's a lot
it
of
is.
projects.
Yeah. And that's not even scratching the surface. I mean, I probably have 15 more that I could tell you about.
Well, until I get overwhelmed with
yes. And that's where I was last week, just thinking, okay, one step at a time. Like, how do I fit it into the big picture, but then still actually make progress on one project rather than seeing the forest and not being able to focus on the trees, right? So you have to keep the balance. So
well, in terms of the mindfulness, just putting a link in that in Santa Barbara, we had a workshop that was empathizing mindfully with fear. And it was led it together with Rodley Weiniger, who has a compassion community, Mindful Heart, there in Santa Barbara. And so we did it. We kind of merged the empathy circle and mindfulness. So Rodley would do a mindfulness. She's doing guided meditation, so there's different forms of meditation. So this was a guided meditation. She would do a guided meditation, and then we would go into an empathy circle and then come back, sort of debrief, and then she would do some more mindfulness and then come back too. And yeah,
that's interesting. So the people who were in the empathy circle, were they talking about their experience with the mindfulness? Is that kind of where the
not really. I
in?
think it was we're talking about fear. It was about the topic was fear, so it was like the mindfulness about was tapping into your sense of fear and anxiety, and then you were talking about the fears. And one of the stages she was talking about fears is growing up, your childhood fears, and then talking about those, but using the empathy circle to discuss it. So the guided meditation helped people connect, with that experience. And then the empathy circle is a space for them to dialogue. So it was a day long, workshop, I think 10 to 5 that we did. So it was with
Man, I would have
multiple.
loved to be a part of that. This is a thing of the past, though. This was last year, right?
Yeah.
That's too bad.
Yeah, we didn't, I think we had like 45 people or 40 people in that workshop.
Well, I would love to see what the difference is, like which is going to be more effective if you use them separately, like if you do just the mindfulness meditation or an empathy circle, like ask people what their experiences with each of those are separately,
Mm-hmm.
but then combining them, see if that elicits more self-empathy, if they're able to engage with their fears more
Mm-hmm.
effectively using both.
Yeah. So you want to do kind of like interviews and kind of
Yeah.
qualitative, get some kind of qualitative reports on
Yeah, I
that.
think that would be really interesting.
The focusing too, we did a workshop with the focusing person, Anita. She did not, no, Annette. She does focusing. I can find that link somewhere. So the focusing is very similar to the mindfulness, was using meditation to tap into your felt experience. And the focusing process helps you sort of stay with the felt experience. And so anyway, it was kind of overlap I
Hmm.
found. So, and again, I was seeing the empathy circle. It's sort of a foundation for focusing that you can do the focusing practice within an empathy circle.
Interesting. So, do I understand correctly that focusing is this is the Gene Gendlin
Hmm.
approach, right? And
Yeah.
so it's an introspective process, or
Yeah.
is it more between people?
It's introspective in the sense that you're trying to sense into your felt experience and getting to um, kind of the edge of your awareness. So you really have your whole bodily sensations, and you're kind of saying, well, here I'm feeling this, here I'm feeling this. So you kind of speak from different parts of where the feelings are in your body, but there's the aspect, different versions of it. But the main one of the more classic is that you have someone that reflects that back, does active listening to reflect back what you're saying. And that reflection helps you kind of stay present with your own feeling. And by sharing it, that actually changes things. So I was like, oh, I'm feeling some tension in this part of my body. When you share it, it actually, that tension will move and expand or contract, or maybe another feeling will arise. So
Hmm.
the reflection actually influences the state of your, and it's getting much more nuanced. Uh,
Yeah, that's really interesting. This week I'm gonna read through this website. I have it up, the International Focusing Institute, because it seems like they have some good like bold headings that I can read some more information about it. I think this will be helpful. Oh yeah, and I see that there are a lot of videos on here too. Okay, well I will take that on this week.
okay, and let me just bring up. This is I recorded a focusing session I did with Ann Weiser Cornell. She's here in Berkeley and kind of a big trainer, and she did an online session with me. So it's a recorded session, so you can see me
Um,
doing focusing.
so this same thing happened last week when you sent me something from cultureofempathy.com, and my computer says that it's suspicious and it blocks it and it won't let me go there.
Huh.
And
Oh,
so I had
it's
to look up, what's the guy's name? The really amazing African American guy. Uh,
Daryl Davis.
Daryl Davis, that's right. So I had to look him up elsewhere, but I couldn't access the interview with him, and the same thing is happening now. Um, but it's safe, right? Like you're looking at
It's safe. What it is, it doesn't have the HTTPS. So your computer's not letting you to go with if it doesn't have the HTTPS certificate. It sounds like it's not letting you go there, which we don't have this. Yeah.
okay, let me see. Yeah, it doesn't even want to let me bypass that.
Huh. What browser are you using?
I have Bitdefender that is super strict.
Oh, uh-huh.
Um, what is my browser?
If you try Chrome or something, it might.
Yeah, I have Explorer.
But does Explorer work? I'm just curious.
I don't even have, let's see. I'm sure I can find it somehow, but I'll try again because I do want to be able to see what, oh, there we go. It let me go there. So you have this one with her, and then I want to see if I can find the Daryl Davis one on here as well. I've been to this website before several times, so I don't know why it's now not letting me. Okay, well, I will peruse this week in all of my ample free time. Oh, you're muted. I don't know how much you've been talking.
Yeah. So yeah, I have this cough, so I was muting when
Oh,
I
okay.
cough, so not to cough into your ear.
There we go.
Yeah. So
There's
there's
the
a
Daryl
Daryl
Davis.
Davis one.
Okay.
Yeah. So okay. So next week we'll go through your presentation and map it onto the empathy circle, and the next
Okay. I
step.
like it.
Sounds good. Okay.
I'll just show you something, just unless you have to hop
No,
off right.
I'm in no hurry.
Okay. I only have a couple more minutes, but I just wanted to show you this analogy that I have at the end of my presentation. Um, if you could let me screen share.
Oh, right. Make co-host. Okay.
Okay. There we go. I'll just really quickly share this with you. Before I started my PhD program and before I met you, this is an analogy that I came up with that I shared in presentations. Basically, thinking of empathizing as going on a hot air balloon ride,
Mm-hmm.
where you have to. So there are different. I have never been on a hot air balloon, but I've read into it so that I could map out what this would look like in my analogy. So when they first start out, they suspend, like they're still tethered to the ground and they're just suspended. So that brings up suspending your judgment. So you walk into the interaction. So this could be the empathy circle, and you just decide before you enter. I'm not going to judge. I'm just going to suspend before I make decisions about who this person is, why they're doing what they're doing, what their needs are, what their emotions are. You just suspend any of that judgment and you just engage with them. So then as you're lifting off, you have to be very careful to monitor what's going on around you. So with that, it's monitoring your lens that you're bringing to the scenario so you recognize that you have baggage that you are bringing to each one of your empathizing encounters. And then this is the one that we typically think of when it's launching into somebody else's world. So we untether. So the way that I talk about this one is it's the most fun because you're soaring up in the sky, but it's also the most dangerous. Because if you're not careful, you could get lost up there and you never find your way back to the ground. And the person who is the captain who's flying the balloon, he makes sure to use his CB radio, and so that is the communicate part of this. So you're engaging in that reflective listening. And so rather than just experiencing it, you're actually communicating to the person, this is what I'm experiencing, and this is what I'm understanding from your experience. And then this is the part that for the longest time I didn't know how to do, is grounding myself. So actually working with your ground crew. So this could be like your friends and family, your therapist, whatever it is, or working on it on your own to ground yourself back down so that you come back from somebody else's experience and you can come back to your perspective, to your safe place, to your own emotions. Because if you're completely lost out there, you end up being like the stereotypical empath
Mm-hmm.
that just takes on everything and doesn't even know what to do with it. And so that's what I used to be. And
Mm-hmm.
that's actually part of why I feel really passionate about this topic is a few years ago, we had a really tragic murder suicide close to our family. It was my husband's best friend, actually. And I was engaging so fully with empathizing with everybody's perspective on this, every different aspect of it. Like I kept seeing the event from everybody's perspective. So I got lost, and I actually had some really serious mental health challenges that came from that. And so that's where I learned that for myself, I need to learn how to ground myself and like literally go outside and breathe the air, touch the grass, smell the smells around me, because I was just completely untethered in my empathizing with other people. So next week, I would love to talk about what this looks like in the empathy
Oh,
circles.
great. Yeah. I'm already
Um,
seeing all the different connections, already making those connections in my
yeah, and so I'm
mind.
excited
Yeah.
to talk about it. And I think what you might bring to what you have already brought to my understanding with this is the grounding part in the empathy circle. Maybe that happens when you are the observer.
Yeah.
Is
I would
that
say the grounding yourself is being the observer, but also being the speaker, right? That
yeah,
you have a chance to speak, and all those people who you were just listening to, that they're actually empathizing with you. So your point of view is being heard. Plus, you're being able to see the community empathizing with each other. So I find that very grounding instead
yeah,
of you just being the listener to everybody and taking it all on, and the balloon is just going, I guess. I mean, yeah, I guess the balloon is kind of going. I don't know. I'm trying to find the metaphor. I just put in a link there for a metaphors of empathy, a little video I had done years ago on metaphors of empathy. Just your metaphor analogies kind of got me thinking
okay.
about
I
that
had to stop sharing in order to be able to find it. It's
called
okay.
metaphor
Yeah, that YouTube
video.
one.
So
Okay,
yeah, just how do we create metaphors? And so I love metaphors. I
that's
think it's
fun.
very creative. It's a creative way of looking at a
And I
topic.
think it's helpful because it is such an abstract topic.
Hmm.
And so having something concrete like like a hot air balloon, like you can envision, okay, I'm going up and I'm communicating with my ground crew and then I'm coming back down, right? And I don't want to just stay out there untethered like in a hurricane. I actually for one of the presentations that I did, I found a video. I'll have to find it and send it to you, but it's a weather balloon in the middle of a hurricane, and there's a weather reporter who goes out to try and retrieve it, and it's going all over the place,
Hmm.
and it's just funny. So I mean, it made everybody in the presentation laugh because it's like, oh yeah, maybe that is what I do when I over empathize.
Well, in conflict, I mean, conflict is like that. You just have really strong feelings. It's just raw. There's a lot of pain. It's just, and that's what the empathy circle helps to create the structure. Structure I think is important to is the grounding that you're not just doing all the listening, and that there's a time limit. People aren't just
Mm-hmm.
going on for hours talking about their problems and their point of view, that they have to listen to others. So it can
Yeah, so it's
become,
great training for
mhm,
everybody
yeah.
involved in it.
And even, and it's like, it's again, I see it like, learning to ride a bicycle, that you start incorporating the mindset, of turn taking, like, hey, giving
Mhm.
space to everyone to be heard. So it's not just, and then being sure that you understand what the person says. So yeah, so it'd be great to talk about that in more depth.
Yeah, well, I look forward to it.
Okay, well, good. Then that's the link there for the metaphors. If you get a chance, you might.
Okay,
It's
yeah, I'll
very
watch it.
short, only 5 or 10 minutes.
I now have, instead of the 30 tabs that I had open before our meeting, I now have probably 45
Oh,
to
yeah.
go.
Good to bookmark them. Okay. All right. See you
All
next
right,
week.
take
Bye.
care.